Good evening and welcome to the final Cabinet meeting of 2023. Before we move to the formal agenda, I wanted to take a moment to recognise a letter we've received today from the Secretary of State, Michael Gove. It's disappointing that we received this several hours after he tweeted about the letter coming from his government department, but we have received that. I'm very clear. He should have been paying attention to what's been happening in Medway in the last 6 months. There's a new team at the top, and we're getting on with the business of delivering a local plan, which the previous administration had 2 decades to do and failed to. Their cabinet repeatedly failed to deliver that. It's worth stating that that cabinet has at recent times included 2 members of parliament for this particular area, so maybe Michael Gove wants to speak to them about the failures of the previous Conservative administration. We will be writing to Mr Gove before Christmas. I plan to get the letter to him, and I'll be very clear in inviting him to Medway to see firsthand the important work that this Cabinet and its hard-working officers of Medway Council are doing day in, day out, despite the lack of funding supplied to us in the recent local government settlement. And I'll also like to ask him why he and none of his ministerial team were available to have a single conversation when it came to the issue of the £170 million that DLUC took from Medway. So that is breaking news. Obviously, that's happened today, and we will keep residents, colleagues informed as we go ahead. I didn't know if any other Cabinet member wanted to make a brief comment on that. Please, Lauren, over to you first.
Thanks, Vince. I just wanted to really thank, Michael Gove for giving us all the opportunity to point out the failings of the local Medway Tories under the previous administration, where, as you said, they failed to deliver a local plan. We haven't had an updated one since 2003, and we all know that that's leaving us open to speculative house building. But as you've quite rightly said just now, Vince, we, as a new administration, a Labour-run administration, are committed to fixing their mess and making sure that we deliver a local plan and fully consult with local people so that we can deliver sustainable housing, employment opportunities and green spaces in a really sustainable way, working with the community.
Thank you very much indeed, Lauren. Very helpful contribution. Teresa, and then I'll come to Nashaba.
Yeah, I think Michael Gove has got a really short memory, hasn't he? The last plan for housing and everything that we need in Medway was delivered actually under a Labour administration. And since that time, nothing has happened. We've done a huge amount of work in the last 6 months. We've had a very high-profile Regulation 18 consultation, 10,000 hits on the website, lots of written submissions, and we will do more, Vince. When you write to Michael Gove, he needs to be reminded of that, and also reminded of the way that his government has impacted local councils. Almost every council in the country now is talking about how challenged we are with our budget, how difficult things are, because the Conservatives don't believe in local services. They have cut them to the bone and are trying to blame everyone else. And here's something else. They have missed their housing targets. They're trying to blame local councils. In the case of Medway, I'm afraid, there is some responsibility to be taken by the last administration. And I know that your letter will remind Michael Gove of that, and perhaps he needs to contact people to get a bit of background information. The other thing his letter shows is how divided and out of touch the Tories are with each other.
Thank you very much indeed, Teresa. Nashaba, please.
Thank you. And I would also welcome the letter that is going to Michael Gove, just to really highlight the complete lack of self-reflection that has happened through the comments that he's made today. This government has played around with housing figures and housing targets since they've been in power. They've always promised that there will be housing delivery. They've never been able to achieve that. They've fallen out over it. Their local authorities have been really challenged over it. And yet, somehow, when it comes to taking responsibility, they failed to do that, and I think that's something that really does need to be reflected. Again, I'd also like to come back to the comments around the HIF funding that was associated with the local plan, which was taken away from us quite brutally when we first came in as an administration, following the failures by the previous administration to get a local plan over the line. And I think that has to be absolutely clear here today, that as a new administration, we've done everything to try and get this process off the ground and get ourselves a local plan that works for Medway, that not only delivers the housing that we need, but the infrastructure and the other kind of green spaces, the opportunities that a local plan is about. We've done everything we can in a really short space of time, setting out a timetable which is challenging but robust and something we believe we can deliver against, and we're doing everything we can to achieve that in a 6-month period. And all that's happened is the government have made that job much more difficult by the decision they took around the HIF funding. And it was really interesting to note that that was not referenced in the letter that Michael Gove wrote to us. There was no recognition that they had taken away 170 million to deliver necessary infrastructure to support the delivery of a local plan. And yet they are sitting here and criticising us, and they're doing that on every level when it comes to things like council budgets, when it comes to funding, and refusing to take their responsibility in what the mess that they have created within the country, and the fact that they're now scrambling to try and find reasons to be relevant. And frankly, it was his previous administration, a Conservative administration, that have led us down this path in Medway. We wouldn't be in this position if it hadn't been for that, and I just want that to be on the record.
Thank you very much, Nashaba. No other colleague has indicated, so thank you for those comments. And again, I'll certainly make sure the spirit of all three of those and much more is in that letter. And we will put that letter into the public domain, so we'll be clear and transparent, as we said we would be as an administration. Let's move to the substantive agenda for tonight. We have one apology for absence, and that's from Simon Curry, who's suffering, like many people, with this cold and flu, so we wish him well. Are colleagues content for me to sign the record of decisions of the 21st of November?
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's move to item 3, which is declarations of any disclosable pecuniary interests or other significant interests. Are there any interests to declare tonight? No, that's great. Thank you then. Let's move on to the first substantive item, really important, as all the items are, but this one in particular because it has such a wide-ranging impact for our community. Teresa, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince, and everybody, and I think special thanks to our public health team and the director, James William, who's been very pivotal in helping to put this strategy together. It's a really important strategy that speaks to the health and well-being of the whole of our Medway population. It's written in partnership with our own health and well-being strategy the two strategies should take consideration of each other, ours being about Medway, the place, and the strategy that we're looking at tonight being the overarching strategy for the whole of Kent and Medway. This is the first of 3 sign-offs that there will have to be. The next one will be from Kent County Council and then from the Integrated Care Board itself. A huge amount of engagement has gone on to bring the strategy to bear, but public engagement with professionals and engagement with councillors. And there's been a very special focus on disadvantaged groups and those most suffering from health inequality. And at its heart is a prevention strategy, the prevention of poor health, that we are working across the whole of our social care division, across public health, to contribute to, so that we help people maintain the best health that they can and take responsibility with support for the way that they live their lives so that they can realise their potential. So I'm really pleased to bring this tonight. It's the first major encapsulation of the new Kent and Medway Integrated Care Board's intentions. There's been agreement right across the board about what we need to do, and what should happen now is the gloves off, hard work to make it happen. And I know that everybody here and across our divisions in the council are going to play their part.
Thank you very much indeed, Teresa. Any questions, comments from colleagues? I mean, certainly, I would say from my perspective, obviously, as someone who will be chairing the ICP in 2024, this is an absolutely critical document. And one of the things that really pleases me, if you look at paragraph 8.5, that there was around 1,000 surveys completed across Kent and Medway. More than half of those were from Medway. So again, big thank you to all those who have made sure that level of contribution was made, along with all the other engagement processes which colleagues can see. I also want to place on record my thanks to the Scrutiny Committee. The minutes are obviously in the addendum report, and I think some very helpful contributions, and the fact that they're requesting an update to go back to scrutiny. Scrutiny matters in Medway. This administration is not afraid of scrutiny. We welcome it. It's a good part of our democratic process in local government. So again, the fact that they're asking very specifically around the outcomes for Medway is to be welcomed. So this is a good report. It does show that partnership working. That doesn't always mean easy conversations. Partnership can mean challenging conversations, but I think this strategy puts us in a strong place. If there's no other colleague, I'll come back to Teresa to sum up the item.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent, everybody. I'll just draw your attention, please, to page 27. With that vision there, we're very faithful to this. It's a real first principle. We will work together to make health and well-being better than any partner can do alone. And that's absolutely running through all of our work on scrutiny, all of our work on joint scrutiny with Kent, and particularly now with the Health and Wellbeing Board. We're around the table saying, what can each one of us around the table contribute to this? How can we make it happen? We don't want to criticise each other, we want to support each other, because everybody knows that it's so important. So I do draw your attention to page 27. There's an easy-to-read, deliberately easy-to-read overview of the 6 things that we want to happen and the way that we need to achieve them. And that has deliberately been written to be accessible to lots of people and hopefully really understandable. And it's a live document. It will change over time. We will measure the activities there. If something isn't going well enough, we will pick it up. If something gets done more quickly than we hope it is, then we can add other things. But I think this is a really good place to start.
Thank you very much indeed, Teresa. Are the 2 recommendations agreed? Thank you very much, colleagues. Let's move on to item 5, school admissions arrangements for 25-26. Tracy, over to you.
Thank you. So each year, the local authority needs to publish admission schemes and arrangements for primary and secondary schools. And if significant changes are being made, then a consultation has to be undertaken. So this report and appendices 1 and 2 give details of the proposed schemes for primary and secondary admissions for September 2025. And section 8 gives details of the 6-week consultation which took place. The proposed changes to secondary admissions are set out in detail in Appendix 2. They involve changes to dates, but also more significant changes to the way that the Medway test will be taking place. The idea of this is it will give a fairer means of assessment for grammar school, and also these changes ought to give more Medway children the opportunity to attend our Medway grammar schools. So the key points to note include the removal of the review process for the Medway test. At the moment, 2% is held back for children to be offered places on review, but in practice, very few of these places are filled. So the proposal is to not have the review and to just automatically give a school place in a grammar school to those 2%. If the review process is removed, this should mean that we will have more children from Medway schools able to attend, because more Medway children will be assessed as being eligible for a grammar school place. We also are talking about removing the writing test from the Medway test and replacing that with an English test, which will give a broader range of assessment there. There are fewer changes to the primary admissions scheme. Those are set out in Appendix 1. They largely relate to dates and timings. So the Cabinet is asked to note the outcome of the consultation in Section 8 of the report, to agree the amendments to the admission arrangements for 2025 in Section 5, and to approve the admission scheme for 2025.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Any colleague wish to comment on that? Teresa, please.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. And I just wanted to say I'm so pleased that we're going to make room for more Medway children. I do think that it isn't healthy for children in Year 7 to commute from such a long way away as they are doing. I want every child in the country to be at the right kind of school for them. And I want them to do as well as they can, but we do have to take into account their welfare and their social development as well as their education. And I think that this piece of work goes a long way towards making that happen. And I'm very pleased in the report that it's quite detailed in terms of the things that were said and the responses that we gave from the wider public. It really helps to show that a large number of people were able to contribute, and the report's strong on equality too, which is important. So I think that this will enable us actually to concentrate on all schools in a way that we haven't been able to, because some of the stuff that has been resolved here has been a distraction. And we can give our attention to everybody to make sure that people are in the right school for them, and that all schools are giving children absolutely the best chances in life that we can. So I'm very pleased to see this report tonight.
Thank you, Teresa. Any other colleague? I think before I come back to you, Tracy, one of the things, again, we've spoken about before, but it's worth saying again because it's relevant to this process, is the disappointing approach that the Commissioner took to the consultation exercise, which I think the three schools did an outstanding job of. This council, prior to the election, actually gave a clear, unanimous position of support for the changes to co-education. And the fact that they're seeking to extend, I think, to an unreasonable geographical position. The schools are cracking on with it. I'd encourage people to make sure they play their part. The three schools have got separate consultations, but they're clearly, the timetables are linked. So that is, again, about central government not really understanding, actually, when we're dealing with an important exercise like that actually the people who know best in that case are the school leadership, the parents and the wider community who want the very best, as Teresa says. It's not healthy for a child to be doing a 50 or 60 mile round trip every single day to come to school. I know why people want to come to Medway. It's a great place, but there are other great places as well, and people shouldn't be, particularly children shouldn't be spending their time doing such a large commute. I know, speaking to friends in the community, that actually the impact on the wider kind of development of children, they won't attend after school clubs because they can't. So the more we can do to focus on making sure the provision is good for Medway, moving to outstanding for Medway wherever appropriate, recognising that certainly for secondary schools we don't have direct control, but we'll always want to work with school leaders, and I'd certainly want to give my thanks to all school leaders at this time of year. They were doing an incredible job, and we recognise that through this process. So thank you, Tracy, for the work you're doing on this too.
Thank you. Of course, you're absolutely right. It's very important, I think, for schools, for children to be going to schools near their homes. And by having more Medway children in our grammar schools, this, of course, will free up capacity in our non-selective schools and mean that children who are going to non-selective schools can also find a place in a school which is near to home for them. So it's got a knock-on effect for all our secondary schools across Medway. So the Cabinet is asked to note the outcome of this consultation, to agree the amendments to the admission arrangements and to approve the admission scheme for 2025.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Is that agreed, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to item 6. Again, back, Tracy, to yourself.
Thank you. So this is the provisional funding formula for mainstream schools and academies for 2024-2025. Funding for schools and academies is provided by central government in the form of the Dedicated Schools Grant, and this is ring-fenced and can only be spent on schools. The government sets a minimum per pupil funding level and Schools Forum agree a minimum uplift. The National Funding Formula Guidance is designed to help local authorities and school forums to plan the local implementation of the funding system for 2024 to 2025. The initial local authority funding allocations were published in July, but this year, due to an error, these were changed in October, and it is worth noting that this meant that we had a reduced allocation of some £2 million. Officers consulted with schools and academies on the proposed local funding formula in November 2023. At their meeting on the 6th of December, the Schools Forum recommended to Cabinet to set a provisional local funding formula based on moving towards the national funding formula, including offering the government's minimum funding guarantee requirements. Please note, though, that these recommendations are provisional. A further report will be submitted to Cabinet on the 13th of February to consider the School Forum's final recommendations, taking into account the latest census data. Because the Schools Forum meets on the 10th of February and the final funding formula needs to be submitted to the Education and Skills Funding Agency by the 19th of January, the matter cannot be taken to Cabinet ahead of this deadline. When the report is presented in February, therefore, it is proposed that the call-in period be waived on the final funding formula to prevent any further delay confirming the Cabinet's decision to the ESFA and to allow the authority to implement the funding formula changes in accordance with the regulations. So, as in previous years, any call-in would need to be made on these provisional recommendations.
Thank you for that helpful clarity, Tracy, on the democratic process that is, of course, always in place because of the timescales. Colleagues, any questions on that at this stage? No, I think that's very clear and straightforward. Obviously, we look forward to the final outcomes early next year. Anything else you wish to add before we move to the vote?
No, just that we're asking to instruct officers to implement this provisional funding formula as set out in the report. Thank you very much. Is that agreed, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to the next agenda item, which is myself, and that's looking at the mid-year review of Treasury management for Medway Council. I firstly want to place on record my thanks to both officers, but importantly the Audit Committee. They take their role very seriously, and I know they've looked at this in some detail at their previous meeting. Their comments can be found within the report. I wanted to highlight in particular, because it's an item which Lauren, you were quite rightfully raised at a previous Cabinet meeting around the Lothbury Investment Trust. And we've had information earlier this week, actually on Monday we received this, so just yesterday, that there had been an exceptional general meeting and there's been a 3-month extension. So colleagues will recall there was a risk to this council because that trust may have been concluded effectively at the end of this calendar year. So the fact that they've asked for an additional 3 months to me looks as if they're continuing to seek investors and conversations, which is a positive thing. We want this to continue. So I've asked officers to keep me fully briefed. And if we weren't having Cabinet today, i.e. one day after I'd got this information, that would have been shared widely with colleagues. But just to update you and actually the wider public, because I know there'll be residents who will be interested in that particular matter, because it's important. You know, every penny of taxpayers' money now more than ever, particularly after the poor outcome we've had from the local government provisional settlement, means that these investments become even more important for the residents of Medway. On that basis, happy to open up for any questions from colleagues at this point. I say, obviously, there was a lot of debate on this audit, and it will go to as is always the case, will eventually go to council for noting. Okay, if there's nothing else, happy to receive the mid-year report. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Let's move on to then item 8, which are 2 car parks, Union Place car park, Temple car park. Nashaba, over to you.
Thank you. As set out in the report, this report references 2 of our car parks, both Union Place car park in Chatham and Temple car park and yard in Strood. The report is asking that we appropriate the above car parks for planning purposes, declare the car park surplus to requirements, so to dispose of the properties on the best terms reasonably obtainable, while securing development of the sites, and authorise the legal department to conclude the contract of sale for both properties, both sites. Just to provide a little bit of background and context to the 2 sites that we're talking about. So the car park at Union Place, Chatham, is currently, we're not able to use it as a car park. It has 49 spaces on it, but access and our permissions to that access have been withdrawn. So it's an unused site that is sat there, that therefore opens it up to, certain challenges around potential problems with ASB, but it also means that it's sitting there as a surplus. Looking at Temple car park, this car park has got 73 spaces. It has seen a reduction in income over the previous years, certainly linked to the COVID-19 pandemic as well, and subsequently. I think there is a view around this particular site around where it's strategically placed and what that could mean for the future of Strood and what comes forward in that on that site and how that interconnects with the wider town centre. So I think there is something that needs to be really carefully considered around that, which is why both of these 2 sites, which are seen as an important, for a number of reasons strategically, have been brought forward. But there's also the other option, which is to leave them as they are, and I think that would open us up to potential further challenge in the future with some of the challenges, particularly in Union Street, around ASB and a site sitting there currently empty. So as set out under the options, there are 3. The first option is to do nothing, and as I've said, that will mean that Union Place car park will remain unused and attract antisocial behaviour. The Temple car park can remain operational and it can produce an income to the council, but I've already set out that there is obviously a strategic option here which would be potentially more beneficial to that particular location and to the wider regeneration of Strood. The option 3 is the one that has been recommended, which is as set out earlier in the recommendations, which is to put forward both of these sites for sale. So I'd like to present that to colleagues today and very happy to take any questions about either of those 2 sites.
Thank you very much indeed, Nashaba. Any questions or comments from colleagues? Teresa, please.
Yeah, thank you, Nashaba. I just want to say that it's really pleasing to see that in your portfolio you're moving forward with property disposals in key sites. It's been very slow to happen in the past. These are both critical sites to the regeneration of Chatham and of Strood. And I think that the report explains very carefully and very well that just leaving them as they are isn't an option for us. We've got to dispose of them and we've got to control the sort of development that goes on there to get the best out of it for both town centres. So it's really pleasing, and I'm sure that there'll be lots more of these coming forward. There's been a long-standing target in the budget for years, actually, of an annual £4 million of property disposals that just hasn't moved. And it's the right thing to do in these tough times.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Before I go back to Nashaba, I agree this is a situation which, of course, is amplified by the fact, this council has had a 91% reduction in our revenue support grant since 2010. So that does mean financial decisions like this have to be made. And Teresa is quite right to highlight that not just in this area, but other areas of the council as well, were set completely unrealistic targets, which they missed every single year, and then set them again the following year. We're going through a far more detailed scrutiny of this. We're doing, frankly, the job we should be doing as a cabinet, working closely with hard-working officers to make sure that we do all that we can to balance the books both this year and in future years. So this won't be the first of one item. This will be the first of many items of this nature coming forward to ensure that actually we do what's right for the taxpayers of Medway. We ensure that our high streets and town centres, where the sites are in those areas, are as vibrant as possible, and we do everything we can to make sure that we are very clear to those who wish to come and invest in Medway that they should be having a proper dialogue with us. We don't want to see, for example, and I pay tribute to the brilliant work you've been doing on the issue of Anchorage House, I don't want to see other sites where developers come along, say that they're going to give a property to be fully registered provider, and then when we ask them the question, how many of those will be for Medway, and we're told, well, we can't answer that, that's not acceptable. That may have been acceptable in the past, it's not acceptable now. So I pay tribute to the work that you're doing, particularly on Anchorage House, but actually more generally, and lots of this is down to the law of the land. It's not down to us as a council, other councils, dare I say it, even developers. Developers are working with the rules that, frankly, benefit them at the moment, so we need to change those rules, and I know the best way to change those rules. Nashaba, back to you.
Thank you both, and thank you for those comments and that support. I think I just want to sort of set out in some closing comments that absolutely there is that huge budgetary pressure that we're facing as an authority, and that means that we've got to look at things very, very carefully. We've got to look for new opportunities, and we've got to find a way to make sure that we're balancing those books with the people of Medway. So that is underpinning a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment, and certainly in the lead up to the budget programme. But actually this goes wider than that. This is about what is strategically right for Medway. How do we make Medway the sort of place that you want to live, you want to raise your family, you want to work in, and that's about having a strategic vision. And actually what we've got here are sites that can be part of that solution. And yes, they are 2 car parks that at this stage probably seem relatively small to people, but actually when you look at it in the wider context about where we're bringing forward regeneration, where we want to drive in investment, they're actually really strategically important. And so this is a step in starting to realise that future of Medway. It's about that wider kind of vision, and it's about starting to get the ball rolling, because we can sit on this for a long, long time, but actually what's happening up and down the country is other authorities are far ahead when it comes to realising what the future holds, how they can create new space, how they can kind of respond to the changes that are currently happening in the world around them, people working from home, people looking for space for arts and culture, people needing new homes, temporary accommodation needs across authorities. So there's lots of opportunity here, and that's part of what the thinking is behind this. But actually we're not going to be able to do that unless we start that process tonight, that we start making those we start looking at this in a bit more detail, and we start strategically thinking about some of our town centres and what we do differently.
Thank you very much indeed, Nashaba. Are those recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We move to item 9, which I'll be moving in the absence of Simon Curry. This is on the issue of planning enforcement. So this report, item 9, details updating the Council's planning enforcement policy, which was originally published in 2017. It's bringing it in line with national regulations and guidance. Should be noted that our enforcement is primarily based around negotiation. We don't go in heavy-handed. We will always try and find suitable outcomes, but we will use enforcement if we need to. The enforcement team in the early 2000s limits the resources, and that means it limits the work that can be done. The planning team are working incredibly hard, despite what secretaries of state might think in SW1. I know our planning team are working incredibly hard, and I know actually councillors of all political persuasions here in Medway recognise that they would love to see more enforcement, but actually it's just not practically possible. There just isn't the resources available to them. So what that does, even with this new set of policies we're bringing forward, is it means there'll be a strict hierarchy of response to all enforcement issues, which means the issuing of enforcement notices and more stringent legal measures being done under exceptional circumstances. So what we're asked to do tonight in the recommendations is to note the updated planning enforcement policy And again, we will recommend this to go to full council. It's a full council decision, but we'll be recommending this for approval. Any colleague wish to comment on that? Tris, please. Thanks. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Vin. So development can directly impact everyone, be that at home or at the workplace. Whilst most development is carried out in accordance with planning rules, there are sadly instances where it is not, such as a homeowner building an extension beyond the original planning permission. We also have a proliferation of rented accommodation and also people using accommodation for profit in terms of maybe for tourism and other benefits. And this is where local councils have a role to play to ensure that these rules are followed and take appropriate action. And this document that is provided tonight gives us a real line of sight and a strategy and also the resources that we are going to be used to deliver that. The document also rightly highlights that we've actually seen significant reductions in this team since 2010. And that's important because the public might have felt over the last 13 years that the council hasn't been particularly responsive, perhaps, over their concerns, that they might have complained about that next door or several doors down that has just got away with what seems like a planning application, or it might be the case that they're next door to what is seen as a commercial premises that is letting out on regular stays without permission. And a lot of people are very frustrated about this. So Medway Council does have a responsible as a local planning authority for the enforcement within the borough, and we have a duty to protect the environment and ensure that development takes place in accordance with these changed national regulatory requirements. And it is of note, actually, that the National Planning Policy Framework, though currently under significant comment today, given Michael Gove's intervention, but within that document it says effective enforcement is important to maintain public confidence in the planning system. And whilst we have a soft approach, it is discretionary, and local planning authorities should act proportionately in responding to suspected breaches of planning control. And I believe that we have maintained a healthy balance, but we do need support, and it is welcome that we are seeing increased resource over the last 12 to 18 months. Because we know that development without planning consent can cause frustration, upset, and even distress for many of our residents, businesses, and visitors. And whilst most breaches are not criminal offences, except for some notable exceptions, such as unauthorised works to listed buildings, we know that it does cause harm to people. So this is a very welcome update. It's positive to see an increase, a stress on how we're going to manage this over the next 4 years, but also an acknowledgement that perhaps over the last 13 years, people have not got the service that they might have expected, and the reasons why. And I'm hopeful that over the next period, if we are to get a Labour government, which is overdue, that we will see an increased respect actually for our council planning services and actually respect for the public in dealing with these issues. And I'm hopeful this will set that path going forward. So I support this wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tris. That's very helpful indeed. Thank you. Any other colleague on this before we go to the vote? I mean, I think I'll just say in conclusion, you know, I echo everything that Tris has said there, that our planning team worked really hard. It's not a lack of desire to get on with planning enforcement. It's just the practical staffing levels just don't allow for what we would want to see. This brings our policy up to date. And yeah, I'm hopeful that in the next 12 to 18 months we may see some changes where, not least, the Secretary of State at least understands what's happening in places like Medway and not just looks at an Excel spreadsheet. So yeah, I'm very, very pleased to be supporting this and recommending it to full council for approval. Is that agreed, colleagues? Agreed. Thank you. Let's move on then. Again, I'll be moving this in Simon's absence. You've got a lot of me tonight. I'm sorry. That is not your Christmas present, I promise. This is around the Authority Monitoring Report. This report concerns monitoring information prepared by the Planning Service in two forms. The Annual Authority Monitoring Report, which is essentially a State of Medway's Place report for the last year. It contains very detailed information on all aspects of development in Medway and meets our statutory requirements for publishing data on development and infrastructure. It contains information on wider social, economic and environmental indicators, together with progress on the preparation of the new Medway local plan, despite what some Secretaries of State may have said today. It also contains the key monitoring measure of annual level of house building, which, although lower than the last 3 years, has continued to be at historic high levels. Nevertheless, it should be noted we're not able to hit the government-set house building target. The infrastructure funding statement is a clear statement which sets out the funding agreed through developer contributions, an issue which I know was raised, for example, at Medway Matters Live. People take an interest in how those Section 106 and other contributions are made. So on that basis, I say it's a fairly straightforward report, and we're recommended to approve publication of both the Authority Monitoring Report and the Infrastructure Funding Statement. Colleagues, any questions, comments? Teresa, please.
I think, obviously, all of our reports are good and they're all well written, but this one is a good read in the widest sense of the word. It shows about where investment is coming into our towns. It shows actually how broad and diverse and successful lots of our businesses are. And importantly, it shows us how far we need to go to actually support all of the great things that are going on already, and gives a lot of interesting information about the way Medway is growing, both in population terms and in business terms and other ways as well. It tells us about the struggles that people have got with not having a job, with house prices, and it provides a really good guide to helping us with a factual encapsulation of the things that we need to do. So I welcome this report. It brings everything together that we need to know about, including things like educational attainment and things that we know we need to work on, particularly in terms of transport, air quality, making our local environment healthier and easier to manage for everybody. So I'm very pleased to see the report, Vince, and thank everybody who brought together all of the information. And as I say, to people watching, to people listening, it's a good read that gives us a lot of hope for the future.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Any other colleague on this item? No, we'll move to the recommendations then as laid out regarding Appendix 1 and Appendix 2. Is that agreed? Excellent, thank you. That moves us to the penultimate item of business. Both this and the next report are really pleasing to receive. And again, I'll be moving both of these in Simon's absence. So this is around a draft neighbourhood plan for St Werburgh and Chattenden. That's been submitted to Medway Council. There is some statutory processes that we need to go through. The next step is to publish a plan at Regulation 16, not to be confused with Regulation 18, which we may have mentioned once or twice today, to gather comments in advance of arranging a formal examination. The housing development issues around St Werburgh and Chattenden are complex. We recognise that, and of course they will be dealt with as part of that emerging local plan for Medway, along with the rest of Medway. The neighbourhood plan deals with type and form of development. So the recommendation on this item is to approve publication of the draft St Werburgh and Chattenden neighbourhood plan as laid out in Appendix 1. Any comments from colleagues? Teresa, please.
Just really to thank Councillor Curry for the work that he has done on this. I know he's engaged very often with the parish councils, with other groups in the community, and neighbourhood plans are a way of making sure that everybody in a particular area can have a stake in the way that their area develops, and I'm looking forward to seeing that happen and seeing these things taken up as we go through the local plan process as well. And I know that Simon's got, huge commitment to this. This is one of a number of neighbourhood plans that are being brought forward, and his expertise and his passion in his absence tonight for making this happen are really welcome.
If there's no other colleagues, we'll move that to the vote. Colleagues agree to the recommendations? Thank you very much. That moves us then to the final item, which is item 12, and that's on the issue of the neighbourhood plan for the Arches area in Chatham. This has gone already through that examination process, the examination assessment of the submitted plan and the recommendations, which include some minor modifications to the plan, shows that this is truly an exceptional document. And I would pay tribute, similar to Teresa, to the brilliant team at the Arches Local and the wider Arches Neighbourhood Forum. They have done a tremendous job, and this will be, I believe, the first urban neighbourhood plans, certainly in Kent and potentially the South East. So again, it shows Medway residents working with their council, leading the way in making sure their voice is heard. That's what this administration is truly all about. So that quality of work, and again, working in close partnership with the council absolutely needs to be recognised. So the recommendation tonight is for Cabinet to approve the neighbourhood plan to be modified in accordance with the examiner's report, and that the neighbourhood plan, as subsequently modified, would then proceed to referendum as laid out in the report. Colleagues, any comments? Tris, please.
Yes, thank you, Vince. And I was formerly councillor in Luton and Wayfield, so have a strong connection with this area. And I just want to reiterate your support for the team at Arches Local and the Arches Local Neighbourhood team forum as well, specifically Stephen and Jackson, who've been working incredibly hard. And I pay testament to all of that effort. The document is outstanding in its detail, and I think will be used as an example actually from across the country in how to engage. And it is worth mentioning that this is amongst one of the most deprived communities in our country. So many examples of this take place elsewhere in very affluent areas, but this actually is one of the few which is taking place in such a situation. And as has been documented, there has been a significant history in this location. It has a long history, a very proud history, but currently it does have high rates of fly tipping, poorly managed housing. As has been stated, in some cases, the community have felt that stuff was done to them rather than with them. And so this actual policy, I think, actually is a massive step in the right direction, where the community's been able to feed into how they want their community to transform. And I think this does set a really positive step. There are 5 key areas which I think have been the focus for Arches Local. Housing, which is to effectively make Luton a more high quality and affordable place for people to live. It is a Victorian Edwardian street environment, but there is a real focus on improving that quality of life for residents there. Providing sustainable transport, it does have a very strong location in terms of proximity to bus links as well as the town centre, but there also needs to be a theme around improving walking, cycling and other types of initiatives. And I note that this council has had a programme of investment along Luton Road, specifically to improve pedestrian safety, as well as looking at bus routes and other provision. So actually we are working in partnership with this plan already in delivering some of that. In addition, community spaces. You will be aware that over the last 10 years, the council has taken ownership and worked with them on Luton Millennium Green, which has seen a real improvement in that location. Now a go-to space for people on shipwrights and on other locations. There's been an improvement around the Network Rail and also a Network Rail site on the Arches itself. And I know the council is looking at the road network in that vicinity as well to introduce further safety measures and potentially improving the quality of road fabric there too. So this is a really strong guiding document, and I can say there is incredibly close partnership working in that location to really change the perceptions and improve the quality. And just lastly, I know that Luton Road might have a bad press in some quarters. I know but actually there are some really strong community groups there. Fit and Fed last summer was a really cutting-edge project delivered through the Arches project, and we are working really hard with a greening programme as well to plant trees along that road. So I can say that there is projects happening alongside this to really transform that part of Chatham, and I'm really proud of that work. This document to me is testament to all of the hard work of groups in that locality. So I'm very happy to support this alongside Councillor Curry, who would be, I can assure you, very vociferously supporting this evening if he wasn't ill. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tris. Teresa, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Tristan, as a former councillor and a fantastic evangelist for Luton, as are Councillor Curry, who's not here tonight, and Councillor Joe Howcroft-Scott. One of the things that has happened in Luton is that people are talking about this. They know it's happening. That's not in any small part to the work of Arches Local and the people that you mentioned before, who have been absolutely vociferous, passionate, determined in bringing this forward. We've had really lovely things, like all the improvements, as you say, to the Millennium Green, the fantastic murals there, the renewed focus on the history of Luton, and indeed, through Nashaba, our own pilot on licensing to help bring up the standard of property and send a message that to any rogue landlords that we're not prepared to have poor quality property in this area, which has been neglected, I think, under the last administration, I'm sorry to say, for many years. And I would just share with people, last night I had the very great pleasure of meeting former councillor Linda Robson, actually. I was at for a family festive and birthday celebration at the Leeds Castle Lights. Linda was there, and one of the things that she talked about was this report, actually, because she's a former Luton resident. Her sadly deceased husband, former councillor Tim Robson, was a massive evangelist for this area. In fact, there's a plaque there in Tim's memory, and she was really pleased. It doesn't any longer live in the area, but keeps an eye on it to see that something was happening for Luton at last, and actually sent everybody, particularly you, Vince, her best wishes. She was really pleased to see a Labour council, and as I said to her, and I'll say this publicly, there's room for you to come back, Linda. She's going to give that some thought. So that was a good thing, and it's surprising how this message is actually getting out about what's happening in Luton.
Thank you very much, Teresa. I can't see any other colleagues, so I should declare an interest as someone who was brought up on Luton Road, who went to school as it was at Luton Infants and Juniors. It's now Luton Primary. I have a very close heart. I guess that's an other interest. Vicky would tell me if that was the case. But the team who have done this, the community have built this report, absolutely inspiring, you know, the best in the country. So I'm proud. That's where lots of people call home. That's part of the Medway family, and I'm very, very pleased to recommend this. And I'd encourage all Luton Archie's local residents to make sure you vote. There might be other elections on the same day, I don't know. But that will definitely be happening, I think, on the same day as the Police and Crime Commissioner election. So that will probably put the turn-up out for the Police and Crime Commissioner, not the other way around. So are colleagues content to support that recommendation? Thank you. Before we close, I've got three final bits of business to finish with before we leave tonight. Firstly, I want to place on record on behalf of this council our best wishes to former councillor MP for Thanet, Craig McKinley, as has been published in the paper today. He's had some serious health issues. He and I were elected on the same day to Medway Council, so we wish him well in his recovery, and thank goodness, as he said himself, thank goodness for the NHS supporting him through his most challenging physical times there with those health conditions with sepsis. Secondly, I won't go through the whole list, but I want to highlight two names in particular from the Make a Difference Awards. So Sue Lovick, who, if you've ever been to Gun Wharf, I know lots of people can't come there at the moment, she is the face of Gun Wharf, and I was so pleased to see that she received Customer Service Award this year. And in particular, although she's not here tonight, and she wasn't there at the award ceremony either, Chloe Golding from the ICT team, who makes sure that people watching this online, that you can see us. Dan is here. He's brilliant as well, for the avoidance of doubt. Otherwise, he'll cut my microphone off. But Chloe is tremendous, and with the flexibility we've had because of RAC, you know, she's done an outstanding job. So huge congratulations to everyone who was nominated and won. And finally, to the Cabinet, to the corporate management team, to the staff across Medway, and to the residents of Medway, on behalf of the Labour and Cooperative Administration, have a very good Christmas and a happy 2024. Thank you, everybody.